Ok.
Ahí tengo.
Escúchame.
¿Ya?
¿Descargó?
Ya hay internet.
Ah, hay internet.
¿No? ¿Tienes el micrófono? El micrófono. ¿Te esperas el último a cargar, no? Sí. No, eso lo pasé. No, no me lo trajeron. El micrófono.
A ella le gustan los helados de yogur. A ella le gustan los helados de yogur. Helado.
Check, check. Check, check. Thank you. ¿Y Alex? ¿Alex? ¿Alex? Ah, se fue al baño.
Ya viene.
Es que estuvimos trabajando con estudiantes y con comunicadores de ciencia.
Ya.
Así que quiero que lo vean un poquito porque estuvo súper interesante. Yo creo que de repente podemos, lo hablaba con Patricia, de repente este año que viene invitarlos a algunos diálogos, que conozcan los resultados.
Nosotros además tenemos tres reservas al servicio del país, donde todos los años vamos sosteniendo, yo 20 años. Lo único que quiero es que se tomen en consideración. Pero no es más, mira,
Sí, yo creo,
no me gusta quejarme a mí, pero veo que vamos a
mi
avanzar.
impresión es que alrededor del informe de Océano podemos hacer una buena conexión. Así que yo creo,
Exactamente,
por
y
eso
acuérdate
quería
que
que
tenemos todo el proyecto, nosotros,
ustedes, claro,
tecnología.
ustedes tienen mucha
Y ese
potencia.
proyecto lo podríamos volver a sacar. Así esa tecnología es y sigue siendo innovadora. Lo que pasa es que la boya nos duró 3 meses en una
Súper.
licea, no alcanzamos ni a calibrarla, ¿sabes?
Alex fue al baño y bien.
Sense.
Yo te estoy confirmando.
Ah,
Fue
ok.
al baño, fue al baño y bien. Mira, mira.
Okay. Well, good morning again, everyone. Good afternoon already. Huh?
Así que hay que repetir algunas cosas.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this Science for Climate Action Pavilion. It is my pleasure to be here moderating this debate. And I will proceed to introduce the context and our panelists. We are now in this panel to explore how Chile and his Scientific Climate Change Council has been working with communities in the goal of providing scientific knowledge deeply rooted in regional realities. So that effort led to a year-long work through the territory for the participants of the dialogues. And we are here to discuss what the experience was like, what the implications are, and what the future holds for efforts such as this. And of course, the relevance at the planetary level, if possible. So my name is Camila Fernandez. I am a member of the Chilean Scientific Council for Climate Change, and I'm happy to moderate this panel. I will present our lead speaker, Alex Godoy. He is the Director of Sustainability Research Center and professor of the Universidad de Desarrollo in Chile. He's a member of Scientific Advisory Committee for Climate Change, C4, as well as me. His work focuses on the sustainability transitions, environmental governance, trade wars, and the integration of scientific evidence into the public decision-making, which is a crucial process, as we know. He has also collaborated with national and international institutions on climate policy, corporate sustainability, and science-based decision frameworks. We have also Madame Francisca Cortez Solari. Happy to see you here. And founder and executive president of the Foundation Filantropía Cortés Solari and Mary Foundation from Chile. Her work focuses on connecting scientific research, education, and territorial communities to advance climate and biodiversity action. Through long-term environment investment in science and outreach, citizen engagement, and environmental education, she has helped strengthen the networks that mobilize knowledge across schools, civil society, organization, and of course, scientific institutions to support the climate decision-making process as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we have Dr. Elizabeth Gilmore. Hi, Elizabeth. Associate Professor of Carleton University, and she is globally recognized for her interdisciplinary approach that bridges engineering and public policy to inform urgent, effective, equitable climate action. Her work highlights the critical importance of effective and inclusive institution and participatory research to enhance the transformatory potential of climate adaptation. So she has been a lead author on the 6th assessment cycle and a review editor for the 7th assessment cycle in the IPCC Working Group 2. So thank you so much for joining us today. Alex, you are our lead speaker today, so you have the floor.
Yeah, and I guess me. So right now, I would like to maybe framing that story because one of the main challenge of the scientific committee is not just getting local information, is how we can involve the local communities, understanding that the local community is not the people living in the rural area. We are talking about local communities when we are talking about the researchers working locally, the indigenous and local knowledge, the private sector, and so on. So in order to try to build that NDC and so on, and org and scientific committee. Right now is I'd like to start to say why that photo. It's because not because I am introducing to my colleagues. It's because the rationale behind of the Chilean government was how we can democratize the science. So the Secretariat has been working in order to recruit different researchers throughout the country in order to represent the North and the South with different disciplines and different backgrounds, trying to keep in the gender balance. In that case, Amaya Galvez is a lawyer, and she's a specialist in climate law. Waldo Bustamante, engineering, for example. And Amaya is working in the south of Chile. Longen is working in the south of Chile, working in biodiversity, forest. Raúl Carrasco is a specialist in climate science, working in Antarctica. Sandra Cortés, the president of the scientific committee, is expert in health science. Camila Fernandez, oceanographer, is working in the south of Chile. Me working in the capital about the engineering issues, circular economy, and so on, sustainable and responsible production. Elizabeth Lam is working at the north of Chile, working with the mining companies, and the focus of the tailing dams and the exposure of the population from different kind of risk, chemical risk. Camila Munoz is working in the south too, working in agriculture, livestock, and forestry. Jorge Perez is working in ecology and biodiversity in Santiago de Chile, and Rodolfo is living there in the Patagonia, and she's a psychologist and working in social science, behavior education. So, and we began democratizing science and based it on the election of the researchers. That's the one. This is the one of the goal of the IPCC. The next slide. So that committee is responding to the needs of the Minister of the Environment, because we are providing advice for the Minister of the Environment in order to build the NDC and the long-term climate strategy. And below us is the Technical Secretariat, the Minister of Science. The idea is be the bridge between the science and Minister of Environment, because the Minister of Environment doesn't have a body, a scientific body. Who is the scientific body? The scientific body is that scientific committee based in the Minister of Science, but that scientific committee, the role is not bring my opinion. The role of that committee is convene all researchers throughout the country in order to try to capture the local knowledge and local production and in Chile. The next slide, please. So what is we are mandated by the law and to do the scientific analysis and long-term perspective. So always we were producing one report. We need to include the reviewers throughout the country, and the Minister of Science is and have a huge databases and about all researchers working on climate science. We need to prepare technical report. Again, we are going to the secretariat. We require different and specialists according of the technical report. We need to provide advice about the capacity building of the strategy and identification of the global trends and works in the studies and advisory requests. The next slide, please. So in that case, we are a non-state actor, that is said previously, and that's the role of us. The mandate is the long-term climate strategy, NDC, and sectoral mitigation adaptation plans. But the rationale behind of the scientific committee is if we want to develop that kind of outcomes, we need to be more inclusive. We need to include different kind of knowledge, and this is because our president and my colleagues, always we are traveling throughout the country in order to engage for the researchers for different regions. This is very important because the feelings of the researchers is, okay, again, the government invite me to bring my advice, drinking coffee, but nothing happened. But in that case, it's completely different because the opinion of the researchers, we are including that opinion and the evidence into the NDC. So the Chilean NDC 3.0 is including the opinion and the assessment of the researchers throughout the country. What's the mean that right now the NDC has been included 50% of our opinion into the NDC according of metrics, for example, goals, we are defining and reports and so on. The next slide, please. So what is the context? The idea is a participatory process and in order to try to capture the subnational knowledge that required and complex governance systems. The next slide. And finally, we propose keep the dialogue. What's the mean that? It's not just workshop. The dialogue was a strategic planning to do different workshops throughout the territory and the north of Chile, Santiago, and the south of Chile, in order to try to extend the invitation for the researchers to discuss about the NDC, the long-term climate strategy, and focus on the report, like the Nexus report. We are right now working in 4 reports: circular economy, Nexus about water area, food security, ocean, biodiversity, and climate and health. But at the same times, we did workshops in order to invite the local communities, schools, for example, and working with students and different kind of levels, and journalists and researchers or people working in science communications. The participation mechanism is sharing papers and in different kind of language, indeed, virtual workshops in some cases, and roundtable workshops, and we couldn't meet in person with the experts. So that's in the south, no? And virtual workshop when we was abroad, Concepción in the south of Chile, Valdivia, south of Chile, Valparaíso, near of Santiago, Antofagasta and Punta Arenas, and the south and the north of Chile, because the idea was trying to be very inclusive, inviting people to them. Next slide. So that's not the workshop. Was so interesting because we put the panels and we asked to the people, what do you think about? What do you think about the goals? What is your opinion about? And the people feel free to discuss. And always the first question was, but that process is useful or not? Do you remember? And because nobody believed, because the most hard things is the trust and confidence in the process. But in that case, we build the confidence because we have included the opinion, bringing the report into the NDC, and that is the people working on. You can see different kind of photos over, and please, and maybe 300, 400? Sorry, the number, we have 300 participants from the country and 162 researchers, 65 students in the schools, and over 90 teachers and communicators working in that kind of process, all in the same workshop. So we mix researchers and community as well. The next slide, please. So what is the contribution right now? And we couldn't achieve 159 researchers, and 50-50 women and men, and from 18 universities, 27 research centers, laboratories, and institute, which was a very good goal. Okay. So that's what are the main outcomes we couldn't to get a territorial perspective on climate action. And we couldn't to understand what the people and understand about climate change. Let me just 30 seconds. Do you know what happened in the south of Chile? In the south of Chile, in the Patagonia, the teachers asked me, do you know that the books on science have that huge bias? Why? Because all the books in Chile have been talking about the forestry. But in the south of Chile, Patagonia, they don't have a specific kind of forest. So the textbook of the science are not including the flora and fauna locally. So this is a huge bias, because when I was living in the north of Chile, you know, in the north of Chile, we have the desert. When I arrived to Santiago de Chile, in all books, we are talking about the flowers and trees and so on. But if you're born in the desert, you are that never see one forest. So that is the bias what we could capture. And this was a very good insights to talk with the Minister of Education in order to maybe include that kind of knowledge into the textbook design. The next slide. So what is the outcome? And we promote environmental awareness for the students. Right now, we are working with them on science, technology, and sustainable energy, and nature and justice and responsibility. What is the question, for example, what educational plans could be applied into the schools, or what sustainable options can be implemented in Chile, for example, for the students and teachers and journalists? The next slide, please. For the teachers, for example, the role of the co-production, for example, and we asked to the students how we can reduce the resource extraction and emissions. The contribute how you can contribute and to fight against the climate actions. So we have an over 90 professionals, 50-50 and 60% females, 36% males, and 71 institutions, schools, and so on. That was very successful. It was the first time that we couldn't do that. And what is the main outcome for the teachers, educators, and science communications? A weak institutional frameworks and fragmented support. We need to integrate the climate change properly. Two, we have unlimited resources on operational barriers. It's incredible that the schools doesn't have finance in order to do experiments, in order to go to the field, to the ground, in order to understand what is the role of the biodiversity. All people is talking about biodiversity, but the schools doesn't have money to and go with the students to the ecosystems. And finally, the communication capacities and locally relevant approaches. It's interesting how the journalists, the communicators have different kind of the strategies in order to communicate the climate change, because they have limited resources, they don't have access of the resources from the government, and always they are inventing different kind of approaches in order to communicate what is going on, what is the impact of the climate change in the north is completely different. What is the climate change impacts in the south of Chile, for example, or the people living in the oceans, near of the oceans, the impacts of the climate change is completely different. So it's very interesting how we couldn't to get that kind of information and understand the big picture, what is going on with the communication of the climate change for the local communities. And what about the recommendations? The schools needs to be territorial hubs for climate action and communication. The second one is we need to adapt the message and methods regionally. It's not useful to have a textbook of science talking about the forest in Iquique, in the middle of the desert. we need to consider the transdisciplinary and immersive methods. All textbooks in science are not including indigenous knowledge, for example, local knowledge. And we need more public funding and platforms and provide the evidence and how that kind of platforms has been useful to share the communications. And we need to recognize the science communication. And we need to put more money there because it's finally people trying to translate the science information into the actionable knowledge for teachers and students. The next slide. So how this model can travel beyond Chile. Once, it's not just about scientific committee. We cannot limit the scientific committee just on a few group of the researchers working together, drinking coffee and bringing the opinion. We need to embed the participatory mechanisms into the national advisory structures. And we have the obligation to try to capture different kind of sources of information because the information is not just in papers. The second one is support the regional knowledge because the landscapes regionally is completely different in the south, north, in France, in Germany, in Saudi Arabia. It's incredible. All we were talking about the forest carbon capture, but maybe people living in Africa is crazy. So we need to try to develop toolkits. If you ask me honestly, the most useful things to translate the science knowledge into the actionable knowledge is the toolkits for kids and facilitate some methods for international adoptions. The next slide. So for the closet, when the knowledge is co-produced across the regions and communities, the climate actions becomes more grounded, equitable, and effective. What is the challenge for the next scientific committee? How we can be more inclusive with indigenous knowledge? Indeed, how we can include the native language. Mapudungun for us, how we can capture that kind of the local knowledge, including into the ORNDC, and how we can scale up that knowledge maybe for another kind of countries as well. So thank you, and I apologize because I was thinking in Spanish, English, and so on, maybe and doing the narrative in my mind. So that was the idea. The idea is try to start the discussion and with the experts about the philanthropical area and Elizabeth, we are very close friends, and with the knowledge how we can be more inclusive. Thank you so much. It's yours.
Thank you, Alex. Wherever you want. So we are joined again by our panelists, and we have a little bit of time for discussion. And I would like to begin by thanking the panel and our lead speaker, of course, and taking the chance to get your opinion first, ladies, before going for the specific question that I have for Alex at the end and the final remarks. So we talk about co-creation in these dialogues because it's more than just sitting and talking. It's getting experiences that usually scientists don't have access to. We met for the first time children that were climate refugees in northern Chile. So that was it was profoundly definitory in the way that we approach the work because it gives us access to reality. And my question for you is, how do you see, for both of you, how do you see the process of co-creation as a tool for negotiations here in COP and also in the governance of natural resources and communities? So, ¿cómo ven el proceso de co-creación en instancias como estas? Porque es más que solamente el diálogo de yo hago, tú haces, es compenetrarse de las experiencias, sacar datos que pueden ser traducidos en informes oficiales y eso ir a las mesas de negociación. ¿Cómo vemos el proceso de co-creación en estas instancias de nivel mundial?
Pati me va a ¿Se prende este? Aló, aló, aló. Ahí sí. Bueno, muchas gracias por el panel. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Creo que partir diciendo que la filantropía es una especie como de diplomacia climática.
So thank you very much, everyone, to be here for the invitation. I want to start saying that for me, at least, philanthropy is like
Lo,
climatic
lo, lo, in-
diplomacy.
lo interesante es que nosotros, al ser privado, podemos acelerar, podemos innovar, podemos ir mucho más velozmente para poder concluir los proyectos.
So because we're a private sector, we can accelerate and advance much quicker than other sectors in different projects.
Y es obvio que para nosotros es muy importante trabajar con el sector público, la sociedad civil y los privados.
So for us, it's really important to work with public, private sectors and civil society.
Creemos que en la medida que nos unamos en ese triángulo virtuoso, en un propósito en común, vamos a lograr los objetivos, que es lo que nos ha sucedido.
So we do believe that if we can work all together, we are going to reach our main objective, and this is what we have done as far.
Por ejemplo, poner un ejemplo, hablando de la COP, nosotros llevamos 5 años aquí con IPCC, con WMO, también con Costa Azul, levantando este pabellón.
So just to mention an example, we have been working for 5 years now in this pavilion together with the EPCC, the WMO, and University Côte d'Azur.
Que son organizaciones científicas que están apoyando el cambio climático, y la alianza y la gobernanza que nosotros a lo mejor hemos aplicado aquí en este territorio,
So obviously those institutions are very scientists, so we have developed a kind of governance in this space.
El poder incorporar en la ciencia otros temas de interés, que no solamente la ciencia quede cerrada, sino que el interés de nosotros como filantropía era cómo sacamos lo más rápido posible los diagnósticos científicos hacia la comunidad.
So our main objective was to try to bring the science to the community, to bring those knowledge to the community. And in that sense, we try to make a proposal in order to include in the conversation of the EPCC and WMO people from other sectors to make it broader.
Eso nos llevó también a posteriormente a desafiarnos aún más y poder hacer proyectos no solamente educativos, sino ya proyectos innovadores y tecnológicos.
Besides that, we started to develop in Chile project not only scientists, but also technological.
Entonces lo interesante es ver cómo desde la conservación, desde la amenaza territorial, con la educación y esto, con un desarrollo de algún proyecto que tenga que ver con implementar o resolver una problemática territorial.
So the challenge is to use what we do in education,
rápido.
to use what we do in everything to fix a challenge in an ecosystem in particular.
Eso nos dio para, al sacar los objetos de conservación de cada uno de los territorios, nos hace también el poder dirigir la información hacia la comunidad y el territorio.
So in each territory, we define the species under threat and we communicate this information with the territory.
Y concluir finalmente en un proyecto emblemático a nivel nacional.
And then we try to define or to develop an emblematic project at the national level.
Donde realmente fue un desafío y fue un ejemplo en ese momento, porque no existía como esta alineación entre los diferentes sectores que se reunieron en esta mesa durante un año para resolver cómo íbamos a hacer con el proyecto de tecnología en la zona del Corcovado.
So at that time, we developed the Blue Book Initiative, this project in Golfo Corcovado, and to do so, we developed several working tables that Francisca is mentioning.
Creo que lo más interesante de mi experiencia después de 25 años ha sido entender de que nunca esperé que llegara una política pública.
So maybe my first, my first lesson was that I never ask or never wait for public policy.
Sino que la decisión fue salir a los tomadores de decisión, unirnos con los tomadores de decisión y trabajar en conjunto con los líderes en diferentes áreas.
So the decision was to visit the policymakers and try to work together in different areas, in different sectors.
Líderes científicos, líderes educadores, líderes indígenas, líderes políticos, líderes empresariales, líderes estudiantiles. Finalmente lo que necesitamos hoy en día son buenos líderes para poder apoyar lo que estamos
So
levantando.
we started to work with scientist leaders, native people leaders, private sector leaders from all the sectors, because at the end of the day, we need good leaders to make it work.
Ahora, como para terminar, estos 25 años de trabajo ha sido este trabajo en Chile, donde es un país realmente impresionante, donde tiene todo para desarrollar, todo por desarrollarse, además de tener, y no es porque, pero creo que tenemos mucha capacidad en capacidad mental, capacidad de educadores, capacidades tecnológica, tenemos muchas capacidades para poder mostrarle al mundo desde el Cono Sur qué es lo que somos y lo que valemos.
I will try to remember everything. So we are from Chile. Chile is a great and wonderful country because of the nature, because of our capacities, and we really can do everything. And so we need to find a way to show that to the rest of the world.
Y eso, y tenemos mucho que mostrar también al mundo y creo que este pabellón también, después de 5 años, es un ejemplo real de una relación diplomática que apunta hacia un objetivo claro, donde cada uno aporta desde su lugar lo mejor que tiene, sin diferenciaciones, sin solamente poniendo el corazón en todo lo que hacemos.
So we have to show many things to show, and probably this pavilion is the best example that we can work all together, putting the best of ourselves in this space with no
Y me
discrimination.
voy a tomar un minutito para salirme del guión, porque aquí tengo un hombre al frente que es una persona que es Abdalá, ha sido una persona tremendamente bondadosa, es una persona realmente con un corazón increíble, ha tenido, nos ha acompañado, nos ha apoyado, nos ha ayudado. Realmente estamos súper agradecidos porque siempre cuando lo llamamos, él siempre fue, atravesó el mundo para apoyarnos. Así que, Abdalá, yo sé que esta es tu última COP, te vamos a echar mucho de menos, pero te queremos igual dejar invitado a Chile ahora ya que estamos aquí. Nos encantaría que tal vez puedas ir a las universidades de Chile y poder contar tu experiencia de todos estos años trabajando en un liderazgo súper grande con el IPCC. Realmente, Abdalá, eres de esos hombres que necesitamos más en el mundo.
Abdallah, I think you understood a little bit. I'm just going to say that we love you so much.
Gracias,
Thank
Abdalá.
you very, very
Muchas
much.
gracias por
It would
todos estos
haven't been
años.
possible without you.
Muchas
Thank you for the
gracias.
trust. Thank you for, as Francisca said, crossing around the world for us. We are really gonna miss you, but we are not let you. You cannot leave. You know that we already talked about that. So please come to Chile. You are completely invited. Thank you really much. And your leadership in EPCC was tremendous. So thank you really.
Thank you. This one? Thank you, and thank you so much, Alex, for inviting me. Thank you for those incredible comments, and I'm going to join in a sincere and heartfelt thank you to Abdallah for all of the work that you have done over the years on behalf of the IPCC and the scientific community. I'm going to make a couple points here. I'm going to kind of start somewhere and see where I end. But I think it starts really sort of as a reflection of just how privileged, especially in global North contexts, it can be to be a faculty member We occupy such a unique position. I sort of joke like having this type of freedom in our jobs is really remarkable. Now, I'm not sure everybody knows what we're doing, but we do. And we have a very sort of unique understanding as well of our role. But I think we have to, especially when we're thinking about science in broader policy settings, about science as it relates to Indigenous peoples, local communities. I think we need to take a pretty good look in the mirror these days, and to ask ourselves, are we living up to these roles? I often would think of some of the entry points that we have as scientists and as faculty as often us trying to talk up to government. We've sort of tried to situate ourselves within their halls. And we're often rewarded for this in terms of the incentive structures that exist within the academy. And I'm not sort of saying that this is, necessarily a problem. I think it's helpful that science is there, and I commend governments when they do elevate scientists into those spaces and they listen. And I think we see that across a number of countries. That being said, we're in some very challenging times, and some of those hallways are not open to us in the same way that they have been. So when thinking now about sort of co-creation in terms of this negotiation process, I think we have to think sort of beyond perhaps some of our traditional ideas of talking up to the government and trying to insert our knowledge there, but also using this other part of our privileged position, which is to elevate the voices of those who do not hold the positions that we hold. And I think that's really to a lot of the points that Alex has been, was highlighting, that our potential to really turn our research around and engage in co-production with communities, with Indigenous peoples, with youth, with marginalized groups whose voices are not elevated, who do not have all of these entry points, and to make that our point of departure. And I think in this way, it will not just elevate the voices, but in fact will also enrich our science. Our scientific feedback loop has more conventionally been science to policymakers and back again, right? We aim to respond to them when we think of policy relevance. But I think what this has done is it has impoverished the other part of this loop, which is us working directly with communities and co-producing this research, right? Not us leading this research, us being guided in the research priorities from local communities, from Indigenous peoples, from youth, and using that as our point of departure in our scientific inquiry and elevating that. Now, I think that here, you have to go back to those incentive structures that exist in the academy. Co-production work is even difficult to write into a conventional grant because you're already supposed to know what you're doing. They say, scientists, you write this out. And we now need to say, we're not the right people to write this out. In fact, we need to first go and engage with the local communities before we can co-produce these questions and this inquiry. And so I think there's a call even to our funding structures. I think there's also a call to our incentive structures. Community engaged research is not seen or viewed in the same sort of elevated light as when you've got the ear of the minister, or, you're sort of, in those halls of power. But I think it should be. And I think it needs to be. It is also in that way that we need to think about our own practices once again. Real community engagement, and we like to use this word a lot when we're working with Indigenous peoples in Canada and partnering with them, is that the research proceeds and everything proceeds at the speed of trust. That's not a Gantt chart. That's not a timeline. That is relational work. If we are not listening, we are not hearing. If we are not showing up and showing up regularly, then we are not partnering. So I think here again, we need to think about some of these timelines that we're used to imposing. We need this out by this date. It has to arrive at this time. And questioning whether that is consistent with the types of, with the aim of working with communities and elevating those voices. Because if we do this badly, there is a tremendous risk here. That same risk that we now see where governments might be trying to kick us out, local communities will also, we will lose that trust. And in that way, we impoverish ourselves. And we remove this very specific position that we can fill. And it's not just filling it from a research perspective, it's filling it from a teaching perspective. What I have to bring to my classrooms depends on the relationships that I have. And if I do not spend the time to cultivate those, I'm also impoverishing the pedagogy that I bring. I sort of joked that I didn't really quite know where I was going with some of these statements when I started. But it is, I think, as much to say that when you start moving yourself out of some of those very conventional spots in academia that we can exist in, perhaps a little bit, sort of we're safe there, and we start to engage with IPCC and IPES and some of the other scientific bodies that aim to help us, in fact, bring our science into policy. I think that as we move through this, we need to be very reflexive about why we're doing it, what our goals are, and to all the communities that we need to speak to, who we're speaking for, whose their ability to continue to determine how knowledge is used, and that we're evolving ourselves in these practices. Because I really think without that, we sort of risk falling back in to a lot of expediency, to not changing some of these discourses and dialogues that I think have, we're sort of at a bit of perhaps sort of a bit of a brink here, where we have an opportunity, but we also need to be ready for our structures to evolve in order to make meaningful change and meaningful use of this opportunity. So I'm going to stop there, but thank you, and thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you very much for your remarks. Powerful messages, and very important ones, indeed. I have a final question for Alex, a very specific one before going to final remarks. Alex, having been in this journey of dialogues across Chile with the Council, if head of state would go and ask, I want to implement this in my country, I think it's a great idea, what would be the main lesson learned? What would be your, but you need to pay attention to advice to that person? What could be the main message there?
The learning process, you say. What I learned. Uh, that is very interesting because my another role is like CLA for the next assessment report 7, no? Working in mitigation, working group 3, chapter 1, framing, my boss. It's a joke. So always we are talking about the community, but sometimes we are not listening to the communities. So my main learning is on, sorry, this is a technical discussion, but the main outcome of the IPCC report is the summary for policymakers. And if the researchers wants to if the researchers we need to learn something, is we need to enrich my discourse, learning from the communities, because when I am going to deal with the policymakers, they are not talking in the science or scientific language. So when we are going to discuss on policymakers, or we are bringing advice for delegates, my main conclusion of that kind of dialogue is we need to learn the language of the community, putting the science in context in order to bring in tools to deal with the policymakers and decision makers and another people doing the decisions, because I need to translate that the local knowledge into the actionable knowledge, converting the scientific evidence into the context in order to enrich the discussions there. So it's not just I am the CLA, I am the leader writing a sexy book. No, it's about how we can contribute. But if you ask me honestly, the most important things is how we can learn from the local communities, what is happened there, how we can put the science in context there, and how we can get all of them mixing that knowledge and converting that knowledge in something useful for the decision makers. That was my learning, and we need to listen more to the communities. We need more co-production because we have the papers, we have the knowledge, but we don't have the knowledge of the people, the citizen. That was my learning in that process.
Thank you, Alex. And with that, we will wrap up with some final remarks. The idea of these two side events, and in these side events in particular, is that we as scientists can reflect the reality, the local reality of people. We have the capacity to absorb, to explain what they are enduring. And we need to talk to communities. As you talk to somebody whose life can be significantly changed by global warming, by lack of mitigation, and by political inaction. So how do you talk to somebody whose life could be at risk, whose livelihood is at stake, whose future generations would be dramatically, altered in the way of life? How do you cope as a scientist with cultural modification because of climate change? Some of our takes from these dialogues are deeply rooted in the experiences that we had with communities. And so co-creation turned out to be an excellent tool for translating the need for reversing centralization in a country like ours, and to go and reflect regional realities. Science can do that for communities, and communities can provide us with the knowledge that we need for then going and help negotiators to shape the future we have. I would like to thank you very, very much for your participation in this panel, and to all of you for listening to us. And at home, wherever you are, we are deeply grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much.